The coffee was still hot when the harassment started. Saturday mornings at Rosie's diner carried a particular rhythm. A comforting pulse of sizzling bacon on the griddle, the gentle clink of ceramic mugs meeting saucers, the low hum of conversation that never quite rose above a murmur. Sunlight streamed through the wide front windows, casting long, golden rectangles across the checkered linoleum floor. The American flag hung beside the entrance, its colors faded, but proud, watching over a space that had served the community for 43 years. In the corner booth by the window, Marcus Webb sat with the quiet dignity of a man who had earned his peace. At 68 years old, he carried himself with a posture that age and injury had failed to diminish. His back remained straight even as he bent slightly over the local newspaper spread across the worn formica table. Silver threaded through his close-cropped hair and neat beard, framing a face carved by time and experience into something between granite and mahogany. Hard lines softened by wisdom, strength tempered by sorrow. His hands, scarred and calloused from decades of use, traced the rim of his coffee cup in an absent gesture. These were hands that had held more than coffee. They had held rifles and radios. They had held the weight of responsibility. And they had held dying men who called for their mothers in languages both familiar and foreign. Now they held only a newspaper turning to the obituary section with practiced ease. It was a ritual. Every Saturday morning at 7:30, Marcus occupied this same booth, ordered the same meal, and read the same section of the paper. Black coffee, eggs over easy, wheat toast lightly buttered, the obituaries. His late wife Gloria had started this tradition decades ago. She would scan the death notices with an odd mixture of curiosity and relief, remarking cheerfully, "Just checking to see who beat me to heaven." It had been 12 years since cancer took her. 12 years since Marcus had sat across from an empty seat, but he kept the ritual alive. Today marked what would have been her 71st birthday. The grief had dulled to a manageable ache present, but no longer overwhelming like the phantom pain from his missing leg. That leg, or rather the prosthetic that replaced it, rested beneath the table. A constant reminder of November 2004. Fallujah, the second battle, house-to-house fighting through a city that had become a maze of death. An IED had taken everything below his left knee during his 7th trip into a collapsing building. He had made that trip to carry out the last of 17 wounded Marines. He would have made an 8th trip if the building hadn't come down. The Marine's cap on his head bore no flashy pins or patches. It was worn, the fabric softened by years of wear, but he kept it clean. It meant something to him, not as a costume or a plea for recognition, but as a simple acknowledgement of who he had been and what he had done. Sergeant Major United States Marine Corps, 30 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and a Navy Cross that sat in a drawer at home because wearing it felt like bragging. Lucy Rodriguez, the 19-year-old server working her way through community college, approached with the coffee pot and a warm smile. She had come to adore Mr. Webb over the past year. He tipped generously, 40% without fail, spoke kindly to everyone, and never caused trouble. In a job where difficult customers were the norm, Marcus Webb stood out as a bright spot in her week. Refill, Mr. Webb. She was already pouring. "Thank you, Lucy." His voice was a low rumble of courtesy. She glanced at the obituary section and her smile softened. Checking in on Gloria every Saturday. She'd never forgive me if I stopped. Lucy squeezed his shoulder gently before moving to the next table. Marcus returned his attention to the paper, his eyes scanning names and dates, allowing his mind to wander through memory. This was his sanctuary. Rosie's diner had become the one place in his carefully managed existence where he could breathe without calculating angles, without scanning for threats, without preparing for confrontation. But sanctuary, Marcus had learned long ago, was a temporary condition. The bell above the door chimed. Most of the diner's patrons didn't look up. It was a sound that punctuated the morning dozens of times. But Marcus looked. Old habits died hard, and decades of training had made situational awareness as natural as breathing. He tracked every entrance and exit without thinking, cataloged every face, assessed every potential threat with the instinctive efficiency of a man who had survived by never being caught off guard. Officer Derek Connelly stepped through the door and the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first. Lucy's smile faltered. Tom, the 50-something manager working the register, stiffened almost imperceptibly. The elderly couple in the booth near the door exchanged a quick glance. These were people who recognized trouble when it walked in wearing a badge. Connelly was 36 years old but carried himself with the aggressive posture of someone perpetually ready for a fight. Thick-necked and barrel-chested, he moved through the diner with the proprietary swagger of a man who believed every space he entered belonged to him by right. His uniform was crisp, his gun belt heavy with equipment, and his mirrored sunglasses remained on his face despite being indoors. One hand rested casually on his service weapon. Not a threat exactly, but a reminder. He expected free coffee. The diner provided it. Not out of gratitude or community spirit, but out of a calculated decision that providing free coffee to Officer Connelly was cheaper than dealing with the harassment that would follow a refusal. It was a tax paid in caffeine and quiet resentment. Tom caught Lucy's eye and gave a slight nod. She grabbed the pot and approached the counter where Connelly had planted himself, taking up more space than necessary. "Morning, officer." Her voice was professionally neutral as she poured. "Lucy," Connelly acknowledged without warmth. His eyes were already scanning the diner, moving from face to face, table to table, cataloging the customers with the same attention Marcus had given, but with an entirely different intent. Where Marcus looked for threats to avoid, Connelly looked for targets to engage. His gaze landed on the corner booth, on Marcus, on the black man in the Marine's cap occupying the window seat with the best light and the clearest view of the street. Connelly's jaw tightened. His hand squeezed the coffee mug harder than necessary. "How long's he been sitting there?" He nodded toward Marcus. Lucy followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. "That's Mr. Webb, officer. He comes every Saturday." "I didn't ask who he was. I asked how long he's been sitting there." "About 15 minutes. He's eating breakfast." Connelly took a long sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "That booth has better light than this counter. I'm going to need him to move." Lucy's heart hammered. She had dealt with Connelly before. 6 months ago, he had grabbed her wrist when she took too long bringing his order, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. She had filed no complaint. What would be the point? The system protected people like Connelly. It always had. "Sir, there are 4 empty booths." "Did I ask you to think?" Connelly's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "I asked you to tell him to move." Lucy swallowed hard, set down the coffee pot, and walked toward Marcus's booth with leaden feet. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But she also knew she was 19 years old, making $11 an hour, and had no power to stop what was about to happen. Marcus looked up as she approached, and she saw the understanding in his eyes before she spoke. He had been watching. He had seen Connelly enter. He knew. "Mr. Webb, I'm so sorry, but Officer Connelly is asking if you'd mind switching to another booth." Her voice was apologetic and trembling. Marcus's gaze moved past her to where Connelly stood at the counter staring back at him with undisguised hostility. Recognition flickered in Marcus's eyes. 6 months ago, the parking lot outside the VA clinic. Connelly had stopped him for loitering, demanded identification. Made him stand in the rain for 20 minutes while running his license for warrants that didn't exist. Marcus had complied in silence, filed a complaint that went nowhere, and moved on with his life. Now, here they were again. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was even respectful, but carried the firmness of a man who had commanded others and would not be easily commanded himself. "I'll be done in about 15 minutes, Lucy. Tell the officer there are empty booths available if he needs to sit." It was reasonable. It was polite. It was the answer of a man who had paid for his meal and had every right to finish it in peace. It was also Marcus knew exactly the wrong thing to say. Lucy walked back to Connelly, her hands shaking slightly as she relayed the message. She watched his face flush, watched the muscle in his jaw jump, watched his hand curl into a fist against the counter. "He said what?" "He said, he'll be done in 15 minutes and there are other available booths." "I heard you." Connelly pushed off from the counter. The moment had arrived, inevitable as gravity. "I'll handle this." The wall clock above the register read 7:42 in the morning. Connelly's boots struck the linoleum with deliberate heaviness as he crossed the diner. Each step was a statement, a reminder to everyone present of the authority he carried and the consequences of challenging it. Conversations died as he passed. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The sense of something about to go wrong settled over the room like a cold fog. Marcus watched him approach with the calm assessment of a man who had faced down far more dangerous opponents than an angry cop with an inflated sense of power. He noted the aggressive body language, the hand hovering near the gun, the flushed face that spoke to barely controlled rage. Connelly was wound tight, looking for a reason to spring. Marcus had known men like this before, men who wore authority like armor to hide the weakness underneath, men who needed someone to dominate to feel whole. Connelly arrived at the booth and stood over Marcus, deliberately using his height and position to intimidate. When Marcus didn't immediately cower or look away, Connelly felt a spark of something close to genuine surprise. Most people broke eye contact. This man didn't. "Didn't catch what you told my server." His voice carried the edge of a threat. Marcus looked up calmly, maintaining eye contact without aggression. "I said I'll be finished shortly, officer. There are other booths available." The respectful tone, the measured words. To any reasonable person, this would have de-escalated the situation. But Connelly didn't hear respect. He heard defiance. He heard a black man in his mid-60s refusing an order from a white officer. He heard the kind of challenge that in his worldview demanded correction. Without invitation, Connelly slid into the booth across from Marcus, invading his space with deliberate intent. He leaned back, arms spread across the top of the seat, taking up as much room as possible. The message was clear. "I go where I want. I do what I want. And you will comply. Let me explain how this works." Connelly's voice dropped to a tone he probably thought sounded authoritative, but came across as petty and vindictive. "When an officer of the law asks you to do something, you do it. You don't negotiate. You don't debate. You don't tell me about other options. You move." Marcus kept his hands visible on the table, a calculated gesture born from experience. "I understand authority, officer. I also understand property rights. I'm a paying customer finishing a meal I purchased." Connelly's eyes narrowed. This was not going according to script. The old man was supposed to be intimidated by now, supposed to be scrambling to comply, supposed to be demonstrating the proper deference. Instead, he sat there with that infuriating calm, speaking in complete sentences, acting like he had rights. Connelly's gaze dropped to the newspaper spread across the table. The obituary section. A cruel smile tugged at his mouth. "What are you, some kind of vulture, sitting here reading about dead people?" For the first time, Marcus's composure cracked. It was barely visible. Just a slight tightening around his eyes, a brief tension in his jaw. But it was there. Connelly saw it and pressed forward, sensing vulnerability the way a predator senses wounded prey. "Morbid hobby you got there." Marcus's voice remained steady, but something hard entered it, something that hinted at depths of strength and pain that Connelly couldn't begin to fathom. I'm reading the paper my wife used to read. It's her birthday today. A flicker of something, perhaps humanity, perhaps shame passed across Connelly's face. It died before it could take root. Your wife's dead. You can read that at home. The words fell like stones. Around the diner, several patrons looked up sharply. Tom behind the counter felt his hands curl into fists. This had crossed from harassment into cruelty, and everyone could feel it. Tom stepped out from behind the counter, his conscience overriding his caution. He was a veteran himself. Army Desert Storm honorably discharged 25 years ago. He recognized the Marine's cap on Marcus's head, recognized the quiet dignity of a fellow service member, and could not stand by while this happened in his diner. Officer Connelly. Tom kept his voice level and professional as he approached. Mr. Webb is a regular customer here. He's paid for his meal. There's no problem that I can see. Connelly's head snapped toward Tom with vicious speed. Did I ask for your input? Did I know, sir? But I think we should just let him finish his breakfast and move on with our day. Then back off. Right now, unless you want me citing this place for health code violations. I can make that happen. I can make your life very difficult, Tom. Do you understand me? Tom understood. He understood that Connelly had the power to follow through on that threat, that a badge gave him authority to harass businesses into compliance, that fighting back would cost Tom far more than staying silent. So he retreated, hating himself for it, but seeing no alternative. He caught Lucy's eye across the diner and saw his own helpless frustration reflected back at him. Lucy had her phone out now, recording. She kept it low, trying to be discreet, but she was filming. The elderly couple in the nearby booth, white, probably in their 70s, pulled out their phones too. If something terrible was about to happen, at least there would be evidence. At least there would be witnesses who couldn't be silenced. Connelly turned his attention back to Marcus, and his expression shifted into something more official, more procedural, more dangerous. I'm going to need to see your identification. Marcus had known this was coming. It was a classic move, a way to establish dominance through bureaucratic harassment. He had seen it before, experienced it before, knew that resistance would only escalate the situation. But he also knew his rights, and he knew that surrendering them too easily taught men like Connelly that they could take whatever they wanted. For what violation, officer, I don't need to explain myself to you. I'm conducting an investigation. Identification. Now. An investigation into what crime? Marcus kept his voice calm, kept his tone respectful, but he would not simply roll over. I'm not operating a vehicle. I'm eating breakfast in a public establishment. What legal basis do you have for demanding my identification? Connelly's face darkened. Are you refusing? I'm asking what legal authority you have to make this request. Obstruction of justice. That's the legal authority. You're obstructing a police investigation. Hand over your ID right now, or I'm citing you and taking you into custody. Marcus made the calculation in less than 2 seconds. He could refuse. He could force Connelly to articulate probable cause. He could demand a supervisor. But all of those actions would escalate the situation, would give Connelly justification for arrest, would turn a quiet Saturday morning into something far worse. Sometimes discretion was the better part of valor. Sometimes you picked your battles. Marcus slowly reached for his wallet, moving with exaggerated care to ensure every gesture was visible and non-threatening. He knew the statistics. He knew how quickly situations like this could turn lethal. He knew that being right and being alive were not always compatible goals. He withdrew his driver's license and placed it on the table. Connelly snatched it up with barely concealed satisfaction. Marcus Webb. Connelly read aloud, examining the license with theatrical scrutiny. This address current. Yes, you on parole number, probation number. You sure about that? Connelly looked up, his eyes cold behind the mirrored sunglasses. A lot of guys like you have records. The words hung in the air. A lot of guys like you. The racism wasn't implicit anymore. It was right there on the surface, ugly and undeniable. Around the diner, several people audibly gasped. A middle-aged black man at the counter half stood from his seat, outrage written across his face. His wife pulled him back down, whispering urgently, warning him not to make himself the next target. Marcus felt the familiar weight of it settle over him. This burden he had carried his entire life. The burden of being presumed criminal, presumed dangerous, presumed guilty, until proven innocent, and sometimes not even then. He had worn the uniform of his country for 3 decades, had bled for it, had sacrificed for it, and still he sat here being treated like a suspect in the crime of existing while black. But he said nothing. He had learned long ago that responding to racism with anger only confirmed the stereotypes in the minds of those determined to believe them. So he remained silent, his dignity intact, waiting for this moment to pass. Connelly pocketed the license and stood up. "I'm going to run this. Make sure you're not wanted on any warrants. You stay right here. Don't move." Marcus felt a cold spike of concern. "I'd like my license back, officer." "You'll get it back when I'm satisfied you're not a fugitive." "Officer, you have no legal justification to retain my identification. I'm asking you to return it." The word asking seemed to infuriate Connelly. His face flushed deeper red. "You're asking. You don't ask me anything. You sit there. You shut your mouth, and you wait until I tell you otherwise." He leaned down, and his hand shot out, gripping Marcus's shoulder hard. The fingers dug in, meant to hurt, meant to dominate, meant to remind Marcus of his powerlessness. "You understand me." Marcus didn't flinch. Connelly could feel the muscle beneath his grip, hard, solid, controlled. This old man was stronger than he looked, and there was something in his absolute stillness that was more unnerving than if he had struggled. It was the stillness of a coiled spring of potential energy held in check by will alone. Marcus's voice when he spoke was quiet, but it carried a command that Connelly felt in his bones despite himself. "Take your hand off me." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with the authority of someone who had commanded men in battle, who had been obeyed without question, who expected compliance because he had earned it through 30 years of service and sacrifice. For a moment, just a moment, Connelly felt something close to fear. His training, buried under years of unchecked aggression, whispered a warning. This man was dangerous. Not in the way Connelly usually thought of danger, not criminal, not violent, but dangerous in the way that competent, disciplined, trained people were dangerous when pushed. But Connelly's pride was louder than his training. His hand remained on Marcus's shoulder for another 3 seconds, each one a statement of dominance before he finally released his grip and stepped back. "Don't move from this booth." Connelly was trying to recover his authority. His radio crackled at his belt. "Unit 47, respond to dispatch." Connelly ignored it. He had more important things to do than respond to calls. He had a point to prove. The clock on the wall ticked over to 7:48. Marcus watched Connelly walk back toward the counter, his driver's license still in the officer's pocket. The situation had moved beyond harassment into something more serious. Connelly was now in possession of Marcus's identification without legal justification, and Marcus knew from experience that men like Connelly rarely backed down once they had committed to a course of action. The confrontation would escalate. It was inevitable. But Marcus had one advantage that Connelly didn't know about. His phone sat on the table beside his coffee cup. The screen was dark now, but earlier that morning at 7:15, Marcus had sent a text message. The reply had come 3 minutes later, and that exchange sat in his message history, a safety net that Connelly couldn't see. Marcus had written Rosie's diner usual booth. "Gloria's birthday, join me if you're free." The response had been immediate. "On my way 20 minutes, save me a seat. Sergeant Major, signed Jim." That had been at 7:18. It was now 7:48. Jim was late, probably hit traffic on Route 9, which backed up on Saturday mornings, but he was coming. Marcus just needed to wait him out to keep this situation from exploding until help arrived. The knowledge gave Marcus a sense of calm that Connelly mistook for submission. Marcus wasn't being passive. He was being tactical. Connelly stood at the counter making a show of typing Marcus's information into his phone, checking for warrants he knew he wouldn't find. He was drawing this out, establishing control, making sure everyone in the diner understood that he could detain whoever he wanted for however long he wanted, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Tom stood behind the register, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He wanted to intervene again, wanted to throw Connelly out of his diner, wanted to stand up for Marcus the way Marcus had undoubtedly stood up for others throughout his military career. But Tom was paralyzed by the same calculation that paralyzed most people when confronted with abusive authority: the knowledge that resistance would cost more than compliance. Lucy stood near the kitchen, still recording with her phone. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept the camera steady. If nothing else, there would be evidence. There would be a record that this happened, that people saw it, that it was wrong. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Marcus sat in his booth, his breakfast growing cold, his coffee turning lukewarm. He didn't touch his food. He knew that any movement might be interpreted as provocation. So he sat still and patient, his hands visible on the table, his breathing slow and controlled. The elderly white couple in the nearby booth, Martha and Harold Peterson, married 47 years, had stopped eating. Martha whispered urgently to her husband, "We should leave. I don't want to get involved in this." Harold looked at Marcus, then back at his wife. "Martha, that man is a veteran. Look at his cap. He served. I know, but we could get in trouble if we stay. We're staying. We're witnesses. If something happens, we're witnesses." Martha nodded slowly, her conscience winning out over her discomfort. She pulled out her phone and started recording too. At a table near the window, a middle-aged white man named Greg watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. He leaned toward his wife and muttered the cop wouldn't be doing this if the guy hadn't done something. They don't just harass people for no reason. His wife, Karen, stared at him with barely concealed disgust. "Greg, look at him. He's in a wheelchair. He's eating breakfast." "What could he possibly have done? I'm just saying. We don't know the whole story. The whole story is right in front of you. That cop is bullying an old man." Greg shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to fully commit to either position, caught in the cognitive dissonance of wanting to believe in the inherent justice of authority while watching that authority behave unjustly. At the counter, a middle-aged black man named Deshawn had been eating quietly, trying to mind his own business. But watching Connelly harass Marcus touched something raw in him. He had his own history with police harassment. Traffic stops without cause, questions about where he was going and why, the constant low-grade stress of being treated like a threat simply for existing in public space. Deshawn stood up and approached the counter, his hands deliberately visible, his voice carefully controlled. "Officer, is there a problem?" Connelly turned, sizing Deshawn up immediately. Another one. Another potential troublemaker. "This doesn't concern you. Sit down. I'm just asking if there's an issue. I've been coming to this diner for years. I've never seen anyone cause problems here. I said sit down. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just asking a question." Connelly took a step toward Deshawn, his hand moving to his belt. "You want to get involved? You want to make this your problem too? Because I can accommodate that real quick." Deshawn's wife, Janelle, appeared at his side, her hand on his arm. "Baby, please. Not today. Please." The fear in her voice was real. She had children at home. She couldn't lose her husband to a confrontation with a cop who was clearly looking for a reason to escalate. Deshawn looked down at her, saw the terror in her eyes, and felt his righteous anger collide with the cold reality of risk versus reward. He backed down, hating himself for it, but backing down. He returned to his seat, Janelle gripping his hand tightly. Connelly watched him retreat with satisfaction. This was how it was supposed to work. Push back and people fall in line. Assert authority and people submit. The system worked because people knew their place. He turned back toward Marcus's booth, and his expression shifted from satisfaction to something darker. He had made his point with Deshawn. Now it was time to finish what he had started with the old man who thought he could refuse a direct order. Connelly walked back to the booth, and this time there was no pretense of procedure. This was personal. So, Marcus Webb. Connelly slid back into the seat across from Marcus. Clean record. No warrants. No wants. You're a model citizen. May I have my license back? In a minute? Connelly leaned forward, elbows on the table. I'm curious about something. What's your story? How do you afford to eat here every Saturday? You on disability? Marcus understood where this was going. I'm retired. Retired from what I served in the military. Oh, you served. Connelly's tone dripped with mockery. Let me guess. You swept floors at the motor pool, worked in supply, collected a check for showing up. Marcus's expression didn't change. I was a Marine. Sure you were. Connelly's eyes dropped to the prosthetic leg visible under the table. And let me guess, you lost that leg in service to your country, right? That's the story you tell people. I lost my leg in Fallujah. Connelly laughed, a sharp, ugly sound devoid of humor. Fallujah. Of course. And what you expect me to believe you were some kind of hero, that you were out there fighting the bad guys. Around the diner, the temperature dropped. People who had been trying to mind their own business looked up sharply. This had crossed a line. Mocking a combat veteran's service, mocking his injuries, this was territory that even those uncomfortable with confrontation recognized as deeply wrong. Tom felt something break inside him. Veteran solidarity overrode caution. Officer, that's enough. Connelly didn't even look at him. I told you to stay out of this, Tom. Last warning. Marcus's hands resting on the table had curled slightly. Not into fists, not quite, but the tension was visible. His voice, when he spoke, carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Officer Connelly. I've been cooperative. I've answered your questions. I've provided identification. You've checked for warrants and found none. I'm asking you respectfully to return my license and leave me alone. You're asking me? Connelly's voice rose. You keep asking. Like you're in a position to ask anything. Like you have any authority here. I have the authority of a paying customer who has broken no laws. You're loitering. I'm eating breakfast. You're causing a disturbance. I'm sitting quietly. You're failing to comply with a lawful order. What order would that be? The question hung there, exposing the emptiness of Connelly's justifications. He had given no lawful order. He had no legal basis for any of this. And Marcus, with calm precision, had just forced him to confront that fact in front of a diner full of witnesses. Connelly's face went from red to purple. His hand shot across the table again, this time grabbing Marcus's wrist. You want to play lawyer? You want to quote procedure to me? I'll show you procedure. Marcus didn't pull away, but his voice dropped to something cold and final. Take your hand off me. Or what? Or you'll be assaulting a disabled veteran in front of 24 witnesses with cameras. Is that the choice you want to make? Connelly felt the eyes of the diner on him, felt the weight of the phones pointed in his direction, felt the situation slipping out of his control. He had expected easy dominance, had expected Marcus to break, had expected this to be another story he told in the locker room about putting someone in their place. Instead, he was in a standoff with an old man who refused to be intimidated in front of an audience documenting every moment, and he had already gone too far to back down without looking weak. So Connelly did what he had done throughout his career. When confronted with a situation he couldn't dominate through intimidation alone. He escalated to force. He released Marcus's wrist and stood up. Stand up. Marcus remained seated. Why? Because I'm telling you to. On what legal grounds? Disorderly conduct. I haven't been disorderly. Failure to comply with a lawful order. You haven't given a lawful order. Threatening a police officer. I haven't threatened anyone. Lucy's voice, trembling but audible, cut through the tension. He hasn't done anything wrong. Connelly spun on her. You want to get arrested for obstruction? I'm just saying the truth. Do not make me tell you again. Lucy fell silent, but she didn't stop recording. Connelly turned back to Marcus. I'm arresting you. Stand up. Now. Marcus didn't move. What is the charge I just told you? Disorderly conduct, failure to comply, and threatening an officer. I've done none of those things, and we both know it. Connelly reached for his handcuffs. Stand up, or I'll make you stand up. Marcus made his decision. He could continue to resist verbally, could force Connelly to physically manhandle a disabled 68-year-old man out of a booth, could create a scene that would be even more damning on camera. Or he could stand comply under protest and minimize the physical confrontation. He stood. Even after all these years, even with the prosthetic leg, Marcus Webb stood at his full height of 6 feet 2 inches, and the posture was that of a man who had commanded others for 3 decades. His shoulders were broad, his bearing dignified despite the circumstances, and there was something in the way he stood ramrod straight. Eyes-level presence, undeniable, that made Connelly hesitate. This wasn't the broken compliance he was used to. This was something else entirely. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Officer Connelly, I'm asking you one more time to reconsider this action. Turn around. Now. Marcus turned slowly, his movements careful because of the prosthetic. He placed his hands behind his back. The first cuff clicked into place. Around the diner, phones were up recording everything. Tom was on his phone now too, calling 911, reporting what was happening, asking for a supervisor, demanding that anyone, intervene in this injustice. The elderly woman, Martha, spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. Officer, this is wrong. He didn't do anything. Connelly ignored her. The second cuff clicked into place. Marcus Webb stood in the middle of Rosie's diner, hands cuffed behind his back, arrested for the crime of eating breakfast while a decorated combat veteran who had given 30 years and his left leg to his country. The clock on the wall read 7:54. Connelly gripped Marcus's shoulder and began steering him toward the exit. Marcus moved slowly, his gait awkward with the prosthetic and his hands cuffed behind him. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The injustice was complete, documented on a dozen phones, witnessed by 24 people, and it would make no difference because the system that protected Connelly had protected him through 9 previous complaints and would protect him through this one too. Or so Marcus thought. Tom intercepted them at the door phone, still pressed to his ear. Officer, I have dispatch on the line. They're asking for your badge number and the nature of the arrest. Connelly's eyes narrowed. Get out of my way, Tom. I'm not obstructing. I'm just relaying what dispatch asked me to relay. Move. Tom moved, but he called after them. This is wrong. Everyone here saw it. We're all witnesses. Connelly shoved Marcus through the door into the parking lot. The morning sun was bright, the air crisp with the promise of a beautiful day. Families would be going to soccer games later. Kids would be playing in parks. Normal people would be having normal Saturday mornings. Marcus Webb would be sitting in a holding cell. Connelly's cruiser was parked in a fire lane, an illegal spot that no one would dare challenge. He walked Marcus to the back door, prepared to load him in. And then the silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. It came fast, not recklessly, but with purpose. The driver clearly knew where he was going and was in no mood for delays. The sedan angled directly toward Connelly's cruiser and stopped at a sharp angle that blocked the driver's side door. Connelly looked up, irritation flashing across his face. The hell! The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Late 60s white, wearing civilian clothes. Khaki pants, a polo shirt, and a windbreaker. His hair was salt and pepper and cut military short. He wasn't particularly tall or physically imposing. But the moment he stood up, the entire atmosphere of the parking lot changed. Command presence is a real thing. It's not about size or volume. It's about the way certain people carry themselves, the way they move through space with absolute certainty of their right to be there, the way their very presence demands attention and respect. This man had it in spades. He walked toward Connelly and Marcus, not hurrying, but not wasting time either. Every step radiated purpose. His eyes were locked on Marcus, and as he got closer, his expression shifted from concern to barely controlled fury. Connelly stepped forward, hand moving to his belt. "Sir, step back. This is police business." The man didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. "Officer, I need you to explain what's happening here. I don't need to explain anything to you. Step back. Final warning." The man ignored the warning completely. He walked right up to Marcus, and his voice when he spoke carried weight that came from decades of being obeyed without question. "Sergeant Major Webb." Marcus straightened despite the handcuffs, despite the humiliation, despite everything. Old habits ran deep. "General Corrigan, sir." The words fell like a bomb. "General. Sergeant Major." Around the parking lot, people who had followed the confrontation outside Lucy. Tom, the Petersons, others felt their breath catch. The diner patrons who had remained inside pressed against the windows watching. Connelly's brain stuttered, trying to catch up. What General James Corrigan turned to face Officer Derek Connelly, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. When he spoke, his voice was ice wrapped in steel. "Take those handcuffs off him. Now." Connelly's mouth worked, but no sound came out at first. "Sir, this man was resisting, and I had to make the decision to place him in custody for his own safety and the safety of the other patrons in the establishment who were becoming agitated by his behavior and refusal to comply with my lawful orders. Take the handcuffs off him. Now." Each word was its own sentence, its own command, its own non-negotiable order. Corrigan had spent 40 years in the military, had commanded thousands of men, had given orders that sent people into combat, and he knew exactly how to make his will manifest in the world through the force of his voice alone. Connelly's hands trembled as he reached for his cuff key. "Sir, if you just let me explain the situation from my perspective so you can understand the full context of what transpired here before your arrival. That man is Sergeant Major Marcus Webb, United States Marine Corps, retired." Corrigan's voice rose slightly, and people 3 blocks away probably heard him. 30 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, a Navy Cross. He held the line at Fallujah when his entire platoon was pinned down by insurgents. He saved 17 Marines. The cuff key fumbled in Connelly's shaking hands. He lost his leg, the leg you mocked, carrying wounded men out of a collapsing building. Corrigan stepped closer, invading Connelly's space the way Connelly had invaded Marcus's. And you handcuffed him for eating breakfast. The first cuff came off. Then the second. Marcus brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had left red marks. Corrigan saw those marks, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "Are you hurt?" His voice was suddenly gentle. "No, sir," Marcus said quietly. "Just my pride. There's nothing wrong with your pride, Sergeant Major." "Everything wrong with his judgment?" Corrigan pulled out his phone and looked at Connelly. "Badge number." "Sir, if you'd just listen to my side of what happened here today, I think you'll see that I was following proper procedure and departmental guidelines, and at no point did I act outside the scope of my authority or training. Badge number. Now, or I'll rip it off your chest myself and read it." Connelly, hands still shaking, pointed at his badge. 4727. Corrigan dialed. The phone barely rang once before someone picked up. This is Lieutenant General James Corrigan, retired. I need to speak with Chief Bradley immediately. A pause. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Get him on the phone. Now. 10 seconds of silence. Bill, it's Jim. I'm at Rosie's Diner on MacArthur Boulevard. One of your officers just falsely arrested my former Sergeant Major. Webb. Marcus Webb. Another pause, longer this time. Corrigan's expression softened slightly. Clearly, Chief Bradley recognized the name. Yes, that Marcus Webb. The one who trained half your command staff at Quantico before your time. Corrigan listened for a moment, then his voice hardened again. I watched the entire thing, Bill. I watched your officer harass him, mock his service, mock his combat injuries, and arrest him without cause. Yes, I said without cause. Disorderly conduct. He was sitting in a booth eating breakfast. Multiple witnesses. Everything's being recorded. Your officer has 9 previous complaints, Bill. 9. Connelly's face went white. I want him suspended, immediately, pending a full investigation. Yes, I will testify. Federal civil rights violation, absolutely. I'll be in your office in 2 hours. Corrigan hung up and looked at Connelly with undisguised contempt. You're done. General, sir, I can explain what happened here if you'll just give me a chance to present my version of events, because I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding about the nature of this interaction and my intentions throughout the entirety of this encounter. There's nothing to explain. I watched you. Everyone watched you. There are 24 recordings of you harassing, intimidating, and falsely arresting a decorated combat veteran. Corrigan's voice dropped to something quiet and infinitely more dangerous. You're finished, officer. You just ended your own career. Tom had walked outside, still recording. Now he spoke up. General, sir, I have the entire incident on camera, from the moment he entered the diner. Corrigan nodded. Send that to Chief Bradley, and to me. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Tom. My email's on there. Lucy stepped forward tentatively. I have video too, sir, from when he first started bothering Mr. Webb. Send it to that address. Everyone who recorded this, send it to that address. Phones came out across the parking lot. People began typing, uploading, sending files. The evidence was multiplying, backing up to cloud storage, becoming permanent and undeniable. Connelly looked around at the circle of witnesses, at the phones, at the general, whose barely controlled rage was palpable, and at Marcus Webb standing there with quiet dignity, despite everything. He had made a catastrophic mistake, and some dim part of his brain was beginning to understand just how catastrophic it would be. A police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, a supervisor responding to Tom's 911 call, then another, then a third, and finally a black SUV with government plates that Corrigan recognized. Chief Bradley himself had come. William Bradley stepped out of the SUV, a large black man in his mid-50s, wearing a crisp uniform and an expression of barely controlled fury. He surveyed the scene. Connelly pale and shaking, Marcus rubbing his wrists, Corrigan radiating command presence, the crowd of witnesses with phones. And he read the situation instantly. He approached Corrigan first. General, Chief. Bradley turned to Marcus. Sergeant Major Webb, I presume? Marcus nodded. Chief, I apologize that this happened. I apologize that one of my officers abused his authority. And I apologize that it took a general walking through the door for justice to happen. Bradley turned to Connelly, and his voice turned to iron. Officer Connelly, badge and weapon. You're suspended effective immediately pending internal affairs investigation pursuant to Department Policy 4.17. Connelly's mouth opened. Chief, I can explain what happened here from my perspective, and I think once you hear the full story, you'll understand that I was simply doing my job and following the procedures I was trained to follow, and at no point did I intend to cause any harm or distress to anyone involved in this situation. I don't want to hear it. Not now. Not here. Badge and weapon. Connelly fumbled with his badge, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unpin it. He handed it over, then his service weapon, unloading it with trembling fingers before passing it to the chief. You'll have 48 hours to provide a written statement to Internal Affairs. Until then, you're on administrative leave. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Connelly whispered. Leave now. Connelly walked to his cruiser, got in, and drove away. The crowd watched him go in silence. Chief Bradley turned back to Marcus. Sergeant Major, if you wish to file charges, I'll personally ensure they're processed. You have my direct number. He handed Marcus a card. Use it. Marcus looked at the card, then at Corrigan, then back at the chief. I'll think about it. I hope you do more than think. Bradley's voice was heavy. Because you're not the first, and if this doesn't end here, you won't be the last. Bradley climbed back into his SUV and left, followed by the other cruisers. Slowly, the parking lot emptied as people returned to their interrupted breakfasts, returned to their lives, carrying with them the story of what they had just witnessed. Lucy approached Marcus, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Webb, I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have stood up to him from the beginning and told him to leave you alone and not let him intimidate me into doing what he wanted. Marcus put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Lucy, you did exactly what you could. You witnessed. You recorded. You spoke up when you could. That's all anyone can ask. Tom stepped forward. Your breakfast is on the house, sir, today and every day. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to put a plaque on your booth. Marcus looked embarrassed. That's not necessary. It is to me, Tom said firmly. The Petersons approached Harold, extending his hand. Sir, thank you for your service. I'm ashamed this happened. Martha, his wife, was crying too. We'll never forget this. We'll never forget you. One by one, witnesses came forward, apologizing, thanking him, expressing outrage, promising to testify if needed. The community that had been paralyzed by fear of authority was finding its voice in the aftermath. Finally, it was just Marcus and Corrigan standing in the parking lot. Corrigan looked at Marcus, and for a moment the general's composure cracked. How many times Marcus sighed? 3 times this year. Gas station in February. Grocery store in June. Now this. Did you report them? What's the point, Jim? I'm tired. I did my 30 years. I just want to drink coffee in peace. Corrigan's voice was thick with emotion. You deserve to drink coffee in peace. That's the country you defended. I know. Marcus looked back at the diner. But look at those people. They stood up today. They filmed it. They spoke out. Maybe that's progress. Progress shouldn't require a general walking through the door. No, Marcus agreed. It shouldn't. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 old soldiers in a parking lot bound by shared service and shared grief for what their country still failed to be. Come on, Corrigan said finally. Let's go back inside. Your breakfast is cold. I'll buy you a new one. Marcus smiled. A real smile this time. You're buying I'm a retired 3-star general with a pension. I think I can afford eggs. They walked back toward the diner together. The clock on the wall read 8:14. Inside Rosie's diner, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to something like cautious celebration. Patrons who had witnessed the confrontation were talking among themselves, processing what they had seen, sharing contact information to coordinate their testimony. There was a sense that something significant had happened, that they had witnessed not just an injustice, but its correction, and that their role as witnesses mattered. Marcus and Corrigan slid into the corner booth, Marcus's booth. and Lucy appeared immediately with fresh coffee and a warm, watery smile. "New breakfast is coming right up, Mr. Webb. On the house. You don't have to do that, Lucy." "I want to," she said firmly and hurried back to the kitchen before he could argue further. Corrigan waited until they were alone, then leaned forward, his voice low. "I need to know something, Marcus, and I need you to be honest with me. What Connelly said in there about you being a problem your whole life, has this been happening regularly?" Marcus wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth seep into his palms. "Define regularly." "Marcus, 3 times this year that escalated to confrontations. Probably a dozen more where I was followed, questioned, made to feel like I didn't belong. Parking lots mostly, sometimes just walking down the street." He paused. "I stopped going to the VA because there are always cops in the parking lot, and I got tired of being asked why I was there." Corrigan's expression darkened. "You stopped going to the VA. I stopped doing a lot of things, Jim. I don't wear most of my military gear in public anymore. This cap is about all I kept. I don't go out after dark if I can help it. I don't drive through certain neighborhoods. I plan my routes to avoid areas where I'm likely to be stopped." "Marcus, that's unacceptable. That's survival," Marcus said quietly. "I spent 30 years defending this country. I lost my leg defending this country. I buried my wife while defending this country. And now I spend my retirement trying to be invisible in it because visibility makes me a target." The words hung between them heavy with accumulated grief and exhaustion. "Gloria used to tell me I was being paranoid," Marcus continued. "She was white from Vermont, grew up in a town where everyone knew everyone. She didn't understand that my paranoia kept me alive. Every time I tried to explain, she'd say I was seeing racism where there wasn't any. And then she'd be there when I got pulled over for broken taillight that wasn't broken, or when store security followed me, or when someone crossed the street to avoid walking past me." He took a sip of coffee. "After the 3rd time she witnessed it, she stopped telling me I was paranoid. Started telling me she was sorry. Started crying when I'd leave the house for basic errands because she was afraid I wouldn't come home." Corrigan's hands had curled into fists on the table. "I didn't know it was this bad." "Most white people don't." Marcus said it without accusation, just as a statement of fact. "Even the good ones. Especially the good ones because you don't experience it and you want to believe it isn't happening. And we don't talk about it because we're tired of not being believed." "I believe you. I know you do, now. But Jim, what about next time? What about the next diner when you're not there? What about the next cop who doesn't care that I'm a sergeant major because all he sees is a black man in his space?" Before Corrigan could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "It's from Jennifer at the VA. She sent the complaint records." He opened the email and started scrolling. His face went from concerned to horrified as he read. 11 complaints, Corrigan said slowly. 11 veterans filed complaints against Connelly in the past 3 years, all of them minorities. 8 were dismissed as insufficient evidence. 3 were settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. He looked up at Marcus. One of those 3 was a sexual harassment case involving a female Army veteran. Marcus felt sick. He's been doing this for years, not just doing it, getting away with it. Corrigan kept scrolling. The complaints are nearly identical, targeting people in VA parking lots at veteran gatherings during Memorial Day events. He specifically goes after veterans, like he's offended that we exist. Tom appeared at the table carrying 2 plates of breakfast. He set them down carefully, then lingered. "General, if I may, I'm a veteran too, Army Desert Storm, and I've seen Connelly harass customers before. Not to this extent, but I knew he was trouble, and I did nothing." "You called 911 today," Corrigan pointed out, after it had already gone too far. I should have thrown him out the first time he made Lucy uncomfortable, the first time he demanded free coffee like it was tribute. I told myself it was easier to just give him what he wanted. Tom's voice was thick with shame. I'm a coward. You're not a coward, Marcus said firmly. You're a man trying to run a business in a system that protects bullies. There's a difference. Is there? Tom looked at Marcus directly. Because from where I'm standing, I enabled him. Every free coffee was permission. Every time I looked the other way was encouragement. Corrigan pulled out his phone again. Tom, what's your full name? Thomas Miller. Tom, I'm going to need you to send me a detailed account of every interaction you've witnessed between Connelly and customers or staff at this diner. Dates, if you remember them. Incidents, even if they seemed minor. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you to do something harder. I need you to reach out to other business owners in this area and ask if they've had similar experiences with Connelly. Because if the pattern is as extensive as I think it is, we're not looking at a few bad judgment calls. We're looking at deliberate, sustained harassment. Tom nodded, his expression hardening from shame into determination. I'll make those calls today. After Tom left, Lucy approached with visible nervousness. General, sir, may I say something? Of course. 6 months ago, Officer Connelly grabbed my wrist. Hard enough to bruise. She pulled up her sleeve, though, of course, no bruise remained now. He said I was too slow bringing his order. I didn't report it because what would be the point? He's a cop. I'm a server. Who would believe me? Corrigan handed her his card. Email me your account, everything you remember. And Lucy, I believe you. She took the card with trembling hands. Thank you, sir. As Lucy walked away, Marcus leaned back in the booth and looked at Corrigan. You're building a case. I'm building a coffin, Corrigan corrected. Connelly won't just lose his badge. He's going to face federal charges, civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law. He's going to prison, Marcus. Good. Marcus said it without hesitation, because if he doesn't, he'll do it again. And next time it might be someone who doesn't have a general about to walk through the door. Someone without witnesses. Someone whose word won't be believed. Corrigan's phone buzzed again. This time his expression changed from anger to something more complicated. Satisfaction mixed with grim vindication. The FBI just opened a formal investigation. Federal Civil Rights Division. They're requesting all records related to Connelly, and they're putting together a task force to interview every complainant from the last 5 years. He looked up at Marcus. They want to know if you'll testify. Of course. It won't be easy. His lawyer will try to make you look like you escalated the situation. They'll dig into your past looking for anything they can use. They'll make it about everything except what it's actually about. Marcus smiled grimly. Jim, I testified before Congress about my actions in Fallujah. I was cross-examined by defense attorneys representing insurgent sympathizers. I've been interrogated by people who wanted to find impropriety in how I conducted myself under fire. I think I can handle a police union lawyer. Corrigan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his eyebrows rose. It's Channel 7 News. They want a statement. Are you going to give them one? No. You are. Marcus blinked. What? Marcus, I can tell people what I saw, but you can tell them what it's like to live this. You can put a face and a story to the statistics. You can make people understand that this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. Corrigan leaned forward. I know you hate the spotlight, but this matters. This could actually change things. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, but on one condition. Name it. I don't speak just for me. I speak for the 11 other veterans who filed complaints. I speak for Lucy and Tom and everyone else who's been intimidated by Connelly. This isn't about me being special because I'm a sergeant major with a Navy Cross. This is about what happened to all of us." Corrigan smiled. "That's why you were Sergeant Major Marcus. You always thought about the mission, not the medals." They ate their breakfast in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Around them, the diner slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after what had just happened. Conversations continued, albeit with an undercurrent of barely suppressed excitement. People kept glancing at Marcus and Corrigan, and more than a few came over to shake hands to express support, to share their own stories of encounters with Connelly. An elderly black man wearing a Navy veteran cap approached the table and stood at attention. "Sergeant Major, I don't mean to interrupt your breakfast, but I wanted to say something." Marcus looked up. "Please sit down." The man sat, and Marcus could see his hands shaking. "My name is Robert Johnson. I served in the Navy Vietnam era. And I need to tell you that same officer stopped me 4 months ago, outside the pharmacy. Said I looked like someone they were looking for. Made me stand there for 45 minutes while he ran my information. Asked me questions about where I lived, where I was going, why I was in that neighborhood." Marcus nodded. "Did you file a complaint?" "No. Because I thought it was just me. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I looked suspicious somehow. I thought it was my fault." Robert's voice broke. "Watching what happened to you today, I realized it wasn't my fault. It was never my fault. It was never your fault." Marcus confirmed gently. Robert pulled out a piece of paper with a phone number written on it. "This is my number. If you need me to testify, if you need me to tell my story, I will. I'll stand with you." Corrigan took the paper. "We'll call you Mr. Johnson. And thank you." After Robert left, a Latina woman in her 50s approached. She wore an Army jacket with a 1st Cavalry Division patch. "Sergeant Major, I'm Maria Torres. Army 2001 to 2009. That officer pulled me over last year, claimed my taillight was out. It wasn't. He asked me if I was an American citizen if I had my papers. I was born in Texas. I'm 4th-generation American, and I had just come from a VA appointment for my PTSD." Maria's hands were clenched into fists. "He made me feel like a criminal, like I didn't belong, like my service didn't matter because of my last name and my skin color." She handed Corrigan her information. "I want to testify. I want to make sure he can never do this to anyone else." Over the next hour, 5 more veterans came forward, each with a story, each with documentation. Photos of traffic stops, copies of citations that were later dismissed, records of complaints filed and ignored. Each carrying the weight of humiliation they had been made to feel by a man who should have been protecting them. By the time the lunch rush started, Corrigan had 17 names, 17 stories, and a case that was growing from misconduct into a pattern of civil rights violations that could potentially bring federal charges not just against Connelly, but against the department that had enabled him. Chief Bradley called. "General, we need to talk. My office 2 hours. I'll be there." Corrigan confirmed. Marcus's phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Webb, this is Agent Sarah Rodriguez, FBI Civil Rights Division. I'd like to schedule an interview with you at your earliest convenience. We're opening a formal investigation into Officer Derek Connelly and potentially into the department's handling of complaints against him." Marcus looked at Corrigan, who nodded. "I'm available tomorrow, Agent Rodriguez. Tomorrow works. I'll send you the details. And Mr. Webb, thank you for your service, both to your country and to this case." After he hung up, Marcus sat back and let out a long breath. This got big fast. "It was always big," Corrigan said. "It just took today for people to see it." 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the same booth at Rosie's diner reading the obituaries. Some things didn't change. Some things shouldn't change. But other things had changed dramatically. Officer Derek Connelly had been arrested by FBI agents at his home on federal charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, a charge that carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. He had also been charged by the state with assault, false arrest, and official misconduct. His bail had been denied after prosecutors argued successfully that he was a danger to the community and a flight risk. His police union had initially defended him, issuing a statement about due process and presumption of innocence. That had lasted exactly 18 hours until Tom's video hit social media and went viral. 4.2 million views in the first 2 days. By day 3, every major news network had picked up the story. By day 4, the police union quietly withdrew its legal support, and Connelly's lawyer had resigned from the case. No one wanted to defend him. Not after everyone had seen the video of him mocking a disabled veteran's combat injuries while handcuffing him for eating breakfast. The internal affairs investigation had expanded rapidly. What started as one complaint about one incident had mushroomed into a comprehensive review of Connelly's entire career. 17 veterans had come forward with formal complaints. 9 other citizens had reported harassment. 2 women had reported sexual misconduct. But more significantly, the investigation had uncovered something deeper. Connelly wasn't operating alone. He was part of an informal network of officers who targeted minorities, particularly veterans, at VA facilities and in certain neighborhoods. They shared intelligence, coordinated their stops, and protected each other when complaints were filed. 3 other officers had been suspended. 2 had resigned rather than face investigation. 1 had been arrested on separate charges after evidence emerged that he had been extorting money from undocumented immigrants during traffic stops. Chief Bradley had held a press conference, announced sweeping reforms, and created a new position. Veteran liaison officers specifically tasked with investigating complaints involving veterans and ensuring they received appropriate treatment. The City Council had voted to establish a civilian oversight board with subpoena power to investigate police misconduct. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Corrigan. Running late 10 minutes. Marcus smiled. Jim had made their Saturday breakfast a standing tradition. Every week for the past 3 weeks, the general had shown up, sat in the booth across from Marcus, and they had shared a meal together. Sometimes they talked about the case. Sometimes they talked about Gloria or Corrigan's grandchildren. Sometimes they just ate in comfortable silence, 2 old soldiers enjoying coffee and peace. The diner door opened and Marcus looked up, but it wasn't Corrigan. It was a young black man in his early 20s wearing an army jacket. He was holding the hand of a little girl, maybe 6 years old, who was wearing a shirt that said, "My daddy is a hero." The young man saw Marcus and his eyes widened. He approached the booth tentatively. "Sergeant Major Webb, that's me." "Sir, I'm Anthony Williams. I just got back from deployment. I saw the video of what happened to you." He swallowed hard. "I wanted to bring my daughter here because I wanted her to see that men like you exist. That we stand up, that we don't back down, that we served this country, and we have the right to exist in it without fear." The little girl looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. "Are you really a hero?" Marcus looked at her and his throat tightened. "I'm a man who did his job, sweetheart. Just like your daddy does his job. Daddy says you saved 17 Marines. I did what needed to be done." Anthony's voice was thick with emotion. "Sir, I've been home for 2 weeks, and I've been stopped by police 3 times. For nothing. For existing. And I was starting to think maybe I should keep my head down. Maybe I should make myself smaller. Maybe that's just how it is." He looked at his daughter, then back at Marcus. "But then I saw your video. And I realized that if I teach my daughter to accept that, then all the things we fought for don't mean anything." Marcus stood up and Anthony straightened instinctively. They shook hands. What we fought for matters, Marcus said firmly. And what we do after we come home matters too. Don't make yourself smaller. Stand tall. You earned it. Anthony nodded, his eyes wet. Thank you, sir. After they left, Lucy brought Marcus his refill. That was beautiful, she whispered. That was necessary, Marcus corrected. The door opened again. This time it was Corrigan carrying a newspaper under his arm. He slid into the booth with a grin. You made the Times, he announced, spreading the paper across the table. There on the front page of the national news section was a headline, Veterans Arrest. Sparks Federal Civil Rights Investigation. The article was comprehensive, detailing not just what had happened to Marcus, but the broader pattern of abuse, the department's failures, and the ongoing federal investigation. It included interviews with several of the 17 veterans who had come forward with Lucy and Tom, and with legal experts who explained why this case mattered beyond one incident. Marcus scanned the article, and one quote jumped out at him, something he had said to the reporter. I didn't serve 30 years to be treated like a criminal in my own country. None of us did. And if my arrest helps ensure that the next veteran doesn't have to live with that fear, then maybe it was worth it. You're famous, Corrigan said. I'm notorious, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Does it bother you? Marcus thought about it. No, because it's not about me anymore. It's about all of us. It's about making sure the system changes so that people like Connelly can't hide behind a badge. Lucy brought their breakfast without being asked. She knew their orders now. She also knew to give them space to talk. Corrigan looked around the diner, noting the new plaque on the wall near Marcus's booth. It read, Reserved for Heroes, in honor of Sergeant Major Marcus Webb, USMC, and all veterans who served with honor. Tom really did it, Corrigan observed. He did. I told him it was unnecessary. And he ignored you. Good for him. They ate in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in the way that only old soldiers could be. The diner buzzed with the usual Saturday morning energy. Families, couples, solo diners reading papers or scrolling through phones. Normal life continuing around them. But Marcus's eyes still scanned the room periodically. Old habits, necessary vigilance. He tracked the entrance, noted exits, catalogued faces. He would always do this. It was baked into him at a cellular level. You still watching the door, Corrigan observed. Always will. Does it get tiring? It's been tiring for 68 years. Marcus took a sip of coffee. But Jim, here's the thing. For the first time in a long time, when I scan this room, I don't just see potential threats. I see people who stood up. I see Tom who called 911. I see Lucy who filmed it even though she was scared. I see the Petersons who testified. I see a community that didn't look away. He set down his cup. Maybe that's progress. Maybe it's not enough progress. But it's something. It's something. Corrigan nodded. They finished their breakfast, paid their bill. Corrigan insisted on picking up the tab and stood to leave. As they walked toward the door, Marcus paused at the plaque on the wall. He read it again, and a small smile tugged at his mouth. Gloria would have laughed at this, he said quietly. Why's that? She always said I was terrible at accepting recognition. Said I'd rather blend into the background than stand in the spotlight. Marcus touched the plaque gently. She was right. But she'd also say that sometimes you stand in the spotlight so other people don't have to stand there alone. Smart woman. The smartest. Outside, the sun was bright and warm. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. Perfect weather for families going to parks, for kids playing soccer, for normal people doing normal things. Marcus Webb, 68 years old, retired Sergeant Major of the United States Marine Corps, walked to his car with his friend. His leg ached slightly. The prosthetic always ached after sitting for a while, but it was manageable. Everything was manageable. He had survived 3 combat deployments, an IED blast, and the loss of his beloved wife. He had survived 30 years of navigating a country that didn't always want him but needed him to fight for it. He had survived Officer Derek Connelly, and he would keep surviving, because that's what Marines did. "Same time next week," Corrigan asked. "Same time next week," Marcus confirmed. They shook hands and Corrigan drove away. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a moment, letting the sun warm his face, taking in the simple pleasure of a Saturday morning with nowhere urgent to be. Then he got in his car and drove home. The fight wasn't over. Justice moved slowly. Change moved slower. But today, on this particular Saturday morning, there was peace. And sometimes peace was enough. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to our channel. Not just for us, but because these stories need to be told, need to be shared, need to be remembered. Your subscription helps ensure that voices like Marcus's stories like this one continue to reach people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching.